The sailors were terrified when they saw the bear under the sea. Then something shocking happened. At the edge of the world, where the Pacific swells crash against the cliffs of southern Chile, a Navy patrol vessel glided silently through dawn. The sea was calm, almost glass. The sky barely stirred. It should have been just another quiet morning on the Coyote waters, a routine sweep, an empty horizon, the hum of engines rising over the waves. But then came the signal, a shape in the water, black, moving, wrong. What the crew of the Silvertail spotted next would defy logic, defy expectation, and launch a rescue no one aboard was trained to make. But none of them would walk away unchanged. Dr. Cecilia Ortega would later say she felt it before she saw it, that instinctive pull in her chest that told her the sea was holding something it wasn't meant to. And she was right. What did they find out there, drifting alone in the middle of the ocean? And why would that answer echo around the world? Dawn bled softly across the southern sky, painting the Coyote Sea in gentle hues of pink and gray. The Pacific stretched smooth as polished glass, broken only by the wake of the Silvertail, a Brazilian Navy patrol vessel gliding silently through the early calm. On board, the crew moved with practiced ease. Mornings like this were routine, the kind that made even seasoned sailors forget, briefly, the weight of their duty. Commander Carson Rios stood on the bridge, sipping lukewarm coffee, his eyes as distant as the ocean. The radio murmured with static, punctuated by short bursts of coded check-ins from other patrol sectors. Below deck, a few crewmen played cards. The ship's radar hummed quietly in the background. Then the voice came. Unidentified object, bearing north-northwest. Approximately 100 meters out. It was Asher Moran, first mate and lookout, speaking from the observation tower. His voice, calm but clipped, cut through the morning haze like a blade. Rios lowered his cup. Visual? Black. Drifting. Could be wood, sir. Wait, no, it just moved. Deliberately. That pulled Carson forward. He crossed to the window and raised his binoculars, locking in on the object. At first, it did look like driftwood, dark, slick, slow-moving. But then it twisted. One great paw broke the surface, followed by a heaving mass of fur. His breath caught. "Get Dr. Ortega to the bridge," he said. Moments later, Dr. Cecilia Ortega jogged up the stairwell, windburn on her cheeks and a field tablet under one arm. "What is it?" she asked, already scanning the water. Carson pointed. Cecilia raised her binoculars, adjusted the focus, and inhaled sharply. It was not driftwood. It was a black bear, soaked to the skin, its head barely above water, fur matted with brine. The ocean swirled around it, slow and deadly. It paddled feebly, directionless, its body turned by the current, too weak to fight. This was no illusion. This was something far worse. "It shouldn't be here," Cecilia whispered. "We know," Carson said. She lowered the binoculars, her voice trembling not with fear but urgency. "It's drowning. If we don't act now." Carson didn't hesitate. "All stations, emergency alert. Launch rescue teams. This is real." The once quiet deck exploded into motion, alarms, footsteps, shouted commands. Sailors grabbed ropes, buoys, rubber boats, first aid kits. The calm had shattered. There was no protocol for this. No manual for how to pull a dying bear from the middle of the Pacific. Cecilia turned to Carson. "Permission to board the rescue craft." He looked at her for half a beat, then nodded. "Bring him back." The Silvertail adjusted course. The bear drifted, motionless now, as if waiting. The ocean, moments ago a mirror, now held a question no one could yet answer. And somewhere beneath the roar of engines and the rush of preparation, the sea whispered a truth that chilled them all. Something had gone terribly wrong. The deck of the Silvertail surged into action as crew members scrambled into position. The rescue was unorthodox, unprecedented, but the urgency left no room for hesitation. Deploy rubber boats, ropes, buoys, thermal packs, go. Asher Moran's voice rang out over the roar of the engines, sharp and focused. The once still ship had become a hive of purposeful chaos. Cecilia Ortega stood near the stern, already clad in waterproof gear. She had a sedative syringe tucked into her vest, enough to calm a frightened animal, but light enough not to risk cardiac collapse in an already exhausted body. She wasn't a veterinarian, but she had administered field tranquilizers before. What she hadn't done was climb into a boat to save a bear in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. She glanced over the rail. The black bear was drifting, only its head and part of its shoulders visible now, as if the rest of its body had given up. Its fur, once probably thick and glossy, was slicked flat against its frame. A faint sheen of salt crusted around its ears and snout. It was clearly male, a young adult judging by his frame, not a cub, not old. His size and weight alone made the task ahead daunting. But what stilled Cecilia's breath wasn't his bulk. It was his eyes. They were open, just barely. Dull, unfocused, but not lifeless. Still watching. Still hoping. Boat ready, came the shout from below. Without waiting, Cecilia clambered down the rope ladder and stepped into the rubber raft. The sea slapped cold against her legs, seeping into her boots as she steadied herself. Asher tossed her the emergency kit and the radio. "Stay on comms," he said. "If anything changes, I'll call it." "We've got one shot," she replied. Carson's voice came through the handheld. "Cecilia, approach slow. No waves. No panic. He's holding on by instinct now." "Copy that, Commander." The small rescue boat peeled away from the Silvertail, engine throttled low, cutting gently across the water. Two sailors rowed quietly, their faces drawn and pale. None of them had trained for this. But none of them questioned what had to be done. As they neared, Cecilia could hear the bear's breath, shallow, labored. His snout dipped lower with every exhale. 10 meters out, she whispered. The bear's ears twitched weakly. "Now," Cecilia said. "Buoy." One of the sailors threw it, a foam ring connected by rope, but it landed just shy. The bear didn't react. Too weak to reach. Again. Closer this time. The buoy landed near his shoulder. Cecilia moved to the edge, crawling forward, hands trembling. She reached out, pushing the ring gently under his chest. He stirred, instinct kicking in. His mouth opened. He bit the rope, not with aggression, but necessity. "Good boy," she whispered. "That's it. Stay with me." The moment his head rested on the buoy, the boat jolted. One sailor grabbed the rope and looped it under the bear's side, avoiding his long, sharp claws. The other looped a second line around his hindquarters. "Pull!" Cecilia shouted. The bear moaned low in his throat, barely a sound, but his body shifted, drawn toward them inch by inch. Water sloshed violently into the raft. Cecilia clutched the boat's edge, her fingers numb. Halfway to the boat, the bear's head dipped beneath the surface. "No." Cecilia lurched forward, plunging her arms into the freezing water. She grabbed for fur, anything, her knees slamming into the hole as the boat rocked wildly. She caught his mane-like neck scruff, slick and heavy, and pulled with everything she had. Waves surged over the raft's rim. Her elbow struck the side. Something tore in her shoulder. Still, she held on. "Asher, stabilize us." From the Silvertail, Carson's voice roared over the radio. "Steady the line. Bring her in." The winch cranked. The bear broke the surface again, gasping, spitting water. Cecilia never let go. She didn't notice the blood running down her leg until the sailors helped slide the bear, half floating, half dragged, against the Silvertail's hull. The crew had lowered a wide sling from the winch arm. They guided it beneath his body. As it tightened around him, the bear didn't struggle. He simply lay there, too tired to fear, too trusting to resist. Wrapped in the sling, the bear was lifted slowly, salt water trailing from his matted fur like falling stars. Cecilia climbed up after him, panting, soaked, knees cut open and stinging. "Thermal blankets, now," Asher called. Within seconds, the deck was cleared. The black bear lay swaddled in a fire-resistant thermal cover, a portable oxygen line positioned near his nose. Cecilia knelt at his side, watching for the rise and fall of his chest. Still breathing. Still here. The sound of rotor blades swept in from the south, two SAR helicopters cutting through the sky like silver birds of salvation. Carson exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. "They're in range," he said. The bear, trembling beneath layers of blankets and salt, would live to see the sunrise again. The helicopter blades cut through the southern sky, slicing wind and mist as the aircraft veered north toward the mainland. Inside the transport hold, the black bear lay cocooned in thermal blankets. Secured in a reinforced stretcher designed for large marine mammals, salt water still dripped from his fur, pooling near the base of the harness. A portable oxygen unit pulsed quietly beside him, misting warmth into his nostrils. Dr. Cecilia Ortega sat beside the stretcher, strapped in but leaning forward, one gloved hand resting gently on the bear's shoulder. He hadn't moved since being airlifted, but his breathing had stabilized, slow and shallow, but steady. The heat lamp clipped to the ceiling cast a soft amber glow across his soaked fur, illuminating every rise and fall of his chest like a whispered miracle. She had removed her wet gear mid-flight, revealing bandages hastily wrapped around both knees, the gauze already pink with blood. But she didn't notice the sting. Her eyes never left him. "How are we doing back there?" came the pilot's voice over the intercom. "Stable," Cecilia replied, her voice raw from shouting wind and adrenaline. "He's holding on. ETA, 15 minutes. The vet team's waiting." The bear didn't flinch at the noise. He seemed distant, half dreaming, half clinging to something unseen, and yet every now and then, one ear twitched in response to Cecilia's murmured words. The landing was smooth, the transfer quick. A stretcher team led by staff from the Puerto Montt Wildlife Hospital met them on the pad. Cecilia ran alongside as they wheeled the bear through sliding glass doors, down white-lit hallways that smelled of antiseptic and damp fur. The operating bay was silent save for the rhythmic beep of vitals and the hiss of air from the oxygen port. For fluids dripped steadily into a vein in the bear's front leg. A warm air blanket had been placed beneath him, and infrared panels now glowed on either side of the table, warming his salt-chilled body. A veterinary technician adjusted the monitor. "Heart rate's weak, but responsive. We're flushing seawater from the lungs now." "Malnutrition?" Cecilia asked. "Severe," the vet confirmed. and the saltwaters compromised his skin. But he's young. His system's fighting. Cecilia stepped back, allowing the team to work. She found herself behind a thick observation window, face inches from the glass. Inside, the bear shifted slightly, not a movement of pain, but of life. His paw flexed. A deep, wheezy exhale escaped his muzzle, fogging the air around him. And then, just for a moment, his eyes opened. They locked with hers, glazed, uncertain, but real. He didn't roar. Didn't thrash. He simply looked at her. And in that look, Cecilia felt something shift, gratitude, maybe, or recognition. Or perhaps just the simplest truth of all. He had survived. The photo broke across headlines before the vet team had even removed the 4 lines. A black bear, massive yet strangely weightless, hung suspended midair in a wide nylon rescue sling. His fur, once wild, now waterlogged and heavy, dripped with seawater that fell in slow rhythmic drops, scattering like glass shards through the morning light. Each droplet caught the sun and refracted it, as if the sea itself were mourning what had been done to him. His eyes, half-lidded, held the dull sheen of exhaustion, the kind that sinks deeper than skin, and his paws dangled limp, claws curved no longer in defense, but in surrender. For a moment, he looked not like a predator, but a creature caught between 2 worlds, one that had taken him violently, and one that had refused to let him drown. Below him, the South Pacific stretched vast and cold, an endless mirror of indifference. Above, the rescue helicopter loomed like a steel halo, its blades thundering against the sky, cutting through salt and silence to lift him free. Between them, sea and sky, fear and survival, floated this moment, impossible and unrepeatable. The world had paused to witness what it means to be saved. The image was impossible. And it was everywhere. News outlets called it a miracle. Wildlife organizations called it a warning. International viewers called it a mystery too perfect to be real. But for Commander Carson Rios, watching from the base at Puerto Montt as the world took notice, it was only the beginning. By the time the sun set over the Patagonian coast, federal wildlife agents had begun making calls. The bear's arrival had triggered a cross-border protocol for high-risk animal trafficking. Satellite AIS data used to track maritime vessels was pulled from the days prior to the rescue. The Silvertail's patrol logs were analyzed, every call, every coordinate, every shift in wind direction was combed through. Then the anomaly surfaced. A Liberian cargo ship, the Marhelios, had traveled the same waters 3 days earlier. It had temporarily gone dark, its AIS tracker disabled for nearly 12 hours. That window overlapped almost perfectly with where the bear had been found. Suspicion grew heavier when it was discovered the vessel had offloaded at a private port in southern Uruguay, one long suspected of facilitating black market exports. Containers were missing from its manifest. Cecilia read the report twice, her hands clenched at the last line, one sealed container confirmed to be refrigerated. Internal inspection record unavailable. Exit footage a loss. The theory formed like ice around her spine. The bear had not fallen into the ocean. He had been thrown, dumped like cargo to destroy evidence. A life discarded because someone got scared. She sat alone that night in the quiet observation room of the Puerto Montt Wildlife Hospital, the hum of machines softened by thick glass and the distant sound of ocean rain against the roof. The room was dark except for a single reading lamp in the corner and the soft glow of infrared heat panels flickering through the window ahead. On the other side of the glass, the black bear lay curled on his side in a temperature-controlled enclosure, his massive frame half covered in clean blankets. He was sleeping, finally, deeply. His chest rose in slow, even waves, each breath steadier than the last. The rise and fall of his ribs had become a quiet metronome, ticking off seconds in a room that felt suspended in time. His fur, once tangled and crusted with salt, had begun to soften again. The patches of baldness near his neck were no longer raw, and the cracked skin around his muzzle had faded to the color of pale, healthy leather. But still the trauma clung to him, visible in the small involuntary tremors that ran through his limbs when doors clicked shut, the way his ears flicked at each whisper of movement, the tension that coiled in his shoulders even in sleep, as if his body still braced for the next wave, the next impact, the next betrayal. Cecilia leaned forward in her chair, her hand pressed lightly against the cool glass. She didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. Not to the world. Not to the reporters. Not even to the animal on the other side of the wall. Because this part wasn't about science. It wasn't about rescue protocols or policy changes. It was about bearing witness to what had happened. To what he had survived. And to what they had nearly lost. She studied his face, still drawn in sleep. There was nothing monstrous about him. Nothing unnatural. Just a wild creature torn from the rhythm of the forest, forced to drift through salt and darkness and man-made silence. A bear like him didn't belong in the ocean. He belonged to forests and rivers. To the hush of pine needles under paw. To the echo of his own kind across vast, ancient distances. And yet because of someone's greed, someone's secrecy, someone's cruelty, he had ended up there. Alone. And alone, drifted. Discarded. And for the first time, Cecilia truly understood what they had pulled from the water that day. Not just a bear, but a question. How far will we go until wildness is no longer allowed to exist in peace? Cecilia's reflection shimmered faintly in the glass. And behind it, the shape of the bear, fragile and royal, bruised and enduring. "We owe you more than rescue," she whispered. 2 days later, international press flooded Puerto Montt. Microphones, cameras, voices in 5 languages, asking the same question. How does a black bear end up in the Pacific? Carson stood beside Cecilia at the podium during the first press briefing. He wore his dress uniform. She wore a weathered field jacket and bandages on both knees. "We are still investigating," Carson said firmly. "But we believe this bear was a victim of maritime wildlife trafficking." Cecilia stepped forward. "This isn't just about one animal. It's about a network that treats living creatures as smuggled goods and then abandons them when they become inconvenient." The bear's story had become more than survival. It had become evidence. That night, a marine conservation group in Santiago launched a global petition: stricter inspections on cargo containers at every South American port. Within 24 hours, 500,000 signatures. The black bear, once nameless, voiceless, lost, was now a symbol. Of cruelty, exposed. Of resilience, seen. And of a world slowly waking up. The air smelled different in Washington. Richer. Earthier. Alive. Mist hung low over the treeline as the transport vehicle rumbled to a stop just outside the Hoh Rainforest Reserve, deep within Olympic National Park. The dawn was shy, caught between pale fog and the gold-filtered shadows of ancient spruce trees. Ferns swayed gently in the breeze, dew clinging to their fronds like whispered blessings. Inside the climate-controlled container, the black bear stirred. He had come far, from saltwater lungs and bruised paws to solid footing and healing silence. Over the past 3 weeks at the Puerto Montt Wildlife Hospital, he had regained much of his strength. His fur, now thick and black again, no longer smelled of the ocean. He had gained nearly 10 kilograms, his appetite returning, his eyes clearing. Still, he rarely made noise. He didn't roar or snort like other bears. His recovery had been marked not by sound, but by steady steps, first within his recovery pen, then short supervised walks beneath the Chilean sky. Now, he was home. Or something close to it. Dr. Cecilia Ortega stood near the loading ramp, clipboard in hand, her hair pulled back in a damp knot, exhaustion still stitched into the corners of her eyes. She'd flown with him, stayed beside him during every layover, slept in the cargo hangar in a sleeping bag near the crate. On their final leg, she wouldn't leave until she saw him free. Beside her stood Commander Carson Rios, no longer in uniform, but somehow even more composed in the quiet. He had come not out of duty, but something deeper. A promise made. A bond honored. The gate creaked open. For a moment, the bear hesitated. His front paws stepped to the edge of the crate, claws tapping lightly on the ramp. His nose twitched, catching scents the sea could never carry, wet bark, cedar, moss, the musk of other animals far away. Then, slowly, he stepped down. His paws sank gently into the forest loam. He blinked into the morning light, head lifting toward the breeze. The air rippled around him, brushing his coat like the fingers of the wild itself. His body moved with more confidence than anyone expected, not rushed, not frightened, just present, as if he remembered this place even if he'd never truly known it. Cecilia swallowed a tight breath. "He's not limping," she whispered. Carson nodded. "He's remembering how to be wild." The bear moved toward the trees, stopping once to sniff a low branch. Then he looked back, not for long, not in any obvious way, but his eyes passed over them, quiet, alert, a flicker of recognition, of farewell. And then he turned and walked into the forest. The sound of his movement faded into the hush of the woods, branches parting, birds resuming their song, life folding around him like a story closing its page. Cecilia stood motionless. Carson placed a hand on her shoulder, firm and steady. "You brought him back." She exhaled, a shiver escaping with it. "He brought himself back. We just made sure he had the chance." They watched until the trees swallowed him whole. No fanfare, no roar, just the forest reclaiming its own. The black bear disappeared into the trees without looking back. Cecilia and Carson had watched him vanish, his dark form swallowed by the green curtain of the Hoh rainforest. No roar, no hesitation, just a calm, certain stride into the life he was meant to live. But in the weeks that followed, the silence stayed with her. Back in Santiago, Cecilia returned to her routine, meetings with policy advisors, wildlife trafficking task forces, conservation summits. Her name appeared in journals. Her inbox filled with praise and invitations. She spoke at conferences, wore blouses instead of field jackets, and cited statistics from behind podiums. But none of it answered the quiet ache that had settled inside her, the question that hovered behind her voice whenever she told the story. Was he still there? She didn't need proof. She didn't need photos or a sighting. She needed the forest to answer. And so, months later, she came back. No cameras. No reporters. Just her and a weathered backpack, boots laced tight, and a ranger from the reserve who offered to guide her partway in. They hiked in silence, the ranger pointing occasionally to claw marks on trees, a shredded patch of bark, droppings near a stream bed. Signs of presence. Signs of life. When they reached the old overlook, a ridge that faced the valley where the bear had first been released, the ranger paused. "This is where I leave you," he said, his voice gentle. "You'll be safe if you stick to the slope. If he's nearby, he'll know you long before you know him." Cecilia nodded. "That's kind of the point." She continued alone, moving slowly through the soft, moss-covered earth. The forest was quiet, but never still. The air felt thicker here, green and gold and alive. She passed a broken log where claw marks cut clean into the bark. Further up, a paw print pressed into the mud near a watering hole. It was wide. Fresh. Larger than before. He'd grown. She stopped at a clearing ringed with ferns and ancient spruce. The light filtered in sideways, streaking through the mist like silk. Everything was damp, lush, holding its breath. Cecilia sat on a fallen log, unshouldered her pack, and closed her eyes. She hadn't come to track him. She had come to return something, a promise, maybe, or just the final piece of a story neither of them had finished. Time passed. Birds called. A woodpecker thumped somewhere nearby. She listened, not with her ears but with her whole body, open to the forest in a way she hadn't been since that night on the ocean. And then it came. A roar, not near, not aggressive. A long, deep call that echoed across the treetops and into her bones. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't fear. It was a presence, a voice, a sound that said, "I'm still here." Cecilia stood slowly, heart pounding, not in panic but in awe. She turned toward the direction of the sound, though she couldn't see anything but trees and mist. She didn't need to. She smiled, tears caught on her lashes, unashamed. "You made it," she whispered. "You really made it." Another long pause. Then a final, softer call answered her, closer, almost thoughtful. Then silence. Cecilia slung her pack back over her shoulder and turned to leave. The forest closed behind her in gentle hushes and shifting light. She never saw him. But that didn't matter, because the roar was enough. It was his thank you. His farewell. His claim to the life that someone once tried to take, but which he, through courage and chance and the love of strangers, had reclaimed. And as she walked back toward the edge of the forest, the echo of that sound stayed with her long after the trees fell quiet again. Not every rescue makes the news. Not every survival becomes a symbol. But this one did, because it asked something of us. It reminded us that the natural world isn't as distant as we pretend. That wild lives are not invisible. That the ocean does not forget what is thrown into it. The black bear rescued from the waves didn't just survive a cruelty we couldn't immediately see. He survived because people chose to look closer. Chose to care. Chose to act when it would have been easier to explain it away. Compassion in the face of uncertainty. Action without a playbook. Silence broken by the roar of something returning home. The world may never know how he got there, or how many others weren't found in time. But this time, someone was watching. And this time, the ending was different. If there's a lesson in it, perhaps it's this. The line between human and wild isn't a wall, it's a thread. And sometimes, just sometimes, we get to be the ones who keep it from snapping.